Hello and welcome to Chapter 2, Tools and Techniques for Luminosity Blending. Now, in this chapter, we're going to go over the 3 different techniques for luminosity blending. We're going to talk about using the blend if sliders, we're going to go over apply image, and we're going to go over using channels for luminosity blending. So all of these 3 different techniques kind of have a similar goal in mind, basically the idea that you can edit either the lights or the darks of your images and all of the different things you can do when you have that power. It's a really, really cool thing. So each of these different techniques has a little bit of a different application. So as we go through each of these sections, we're going to talk about those applications as well. So we're starting off with the blend if sliders that are in the blending options of your image. Now, the blend if sliders basically allow you to have your image be visible or not visible based on the lights and darks of either the current layer that you're on or the background layers. And you can also do this by color channel. So we're going to start this off. We're going to go ahead and open our image in Photoshop, just kind of give you a brief explanation, just kind of show you how this works. And then we're going to actually use this to color our photos. So here in Photoshop, we're going to go to our sample images, Chapter 2, Tools and Techniques, and we're going to go to blend if.jpg. Let's go ahead and open this up. I'm going to hit F for full screen. We're going to create a new layer, and on this new layer, we're just going to fill this layer with black, white, and 50% gray. There we go. So there's our black section. Shift delete is the keyboard shortcut for the fill dialog, by the way. So I'm just making selections and filling them with black, white, and gray. You don't have to follow along here. This is really just to like show you how blend if actually works. We've got black, gray, and white now. You can see this is on a new layer, and I want to basically determine how these actually blend with my image. So to get to your blend if sliders, there's a couple ways to do it. You can get to FX down here and go to blending options. Okay, and you can see this opens up your layer style. There we go. Let's hit cancel. You can also just double click right here on the gray area, and that opens up your layer style. That's kind of the faster way, so it's what I usually do. Okay, so let's just bring this to the center here. Your layer style, you can do quite a bit here, and we actually have an entire tutorial on mastering layer styles that'll teach you things like adding a stroke or a drop shadow and things like that. But for this tutorial, we're focusing right down here on this bottom area where it says blend if. Okay, so blend if, and you'll see there's a couple different color channels. So gray is basically the combination of red, green, and blue color channels. So this is going to use blending based on the light levels of your image. And this is, I would say most of the time, like 90% of the time, we just use gray, okay? Because using the light levels of your image mostly is that's usually the most helpful for blend if. And we'll show you how this works. Here you can choose your channels. We're going to leave it on gray. Most of the time, we'll show you how the others work as well. Now, we have 2 different sliders here. We have a slider that says this layer, okay? And one that says underlying layer. And keep in mind, this is all about controlling the visibility. So this is going to be the visibility of the lights and darks on this layer, and on the underlying layer, it's going to take information from your image itself. So let's go ahead and do just a real rough example here, where it says this layer. I'm going to click and drag this little sliders, and when I go from the left to the right, you're going to see immediately that my blacks just totally disappear. Okay? And that's kind of the idea. It's basically taking anything that's to the left of this slider, there we go, and making it disappear. So as I pull this from the left to the right, my blacks start to disappear. As I continue to go, you're going to see my grays are going to disappear. There we go, that 50% gray disappears. And if I go all the way over there, well, it's white, so it's not going to get it. But if it was a light gray, that would disappear too. So just dragging that back, we can see, there we go, now they're starting to reappear. So that's going from the left to the right, which works on your darks first. Now if I go from the right to the left, this is going to go with my lights first. So you can see, here we go, white disappears, then 50% gray, and then black. Now you can use both at the same time. So if I decide to pull this in from the left to the right to make black disappear and white disappear, you can see here we just have our 50% gray, and of course I could hide that too if I wanted as well. So this is all information. You can see it's not taking any information from my image itself. the underlying layers rather. It's literally just whatever's on this layer. So there are a lot of great uses here. For instance, if you want to add stars to a sky and you have a photograph of stars on a dark sky, you can just make the dark area of that image disappear, and then you're just going to be left with the stars. Okay, so anytime you have light and dark information on this layer, you can use blend if. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our underlying layer. We're going to start, same deal here. We're going to start from the left to the right. And as I bring this in, you're going to see now it's a little bit different. Instead of being based on what's actually on this layer, it's based on the information from our background layer. And you can see it's starting to disappear where our background layer is darker. So it's still visible where the background layer is light. You can see here, this is light colored windows and light reflections here. It's still visible there, but it's starting to disappear from the shadows or the dark areas. And then of course the same thing on the other side. So there we go. Now it's starting to disappear from the light areas and only, you can see, just visible in the dark areas. So that's the basic idea of how the blend if sliders work. Now, all of this you can see is kind of like crude, in other words, like it looks, you know, like we can see harsh gradients and things like that. It doesn't look that usable just yet. And the reason is these sliders by default are together. We have to separate them out to introduce feathering. To introduce feathering, just hold Alt or Option and click and drag. We're going to do the underlying layer first. So Alt or Option and click and drag. There we go. And now you can see what was just one little slider there. Hold Alt or Option and drag that out. Now you see we have 2 points. Okay? And as I bring this out from the left to the right, you're going to see it's a lot more of a gradual fade. Okay? The image itself looks a lot more natural with those changes applied. Okay? So bringing this is basically the feathering area. Okay? And then you can still bring this up from that side as well. You can do the same with the lights as well. So hold Alt or Option and click and drag that out. And then of course you can move this point too. So really you have 4 points that you can move around. 2 for your dark points and 2 for your lights. Now let's go ahead and bring those back together. The same thing on this layer. So let's hold Alt or Option. Click and drag from the left to the right. There we go. You can see that gray is just fading away rather than just being visible or invisible. And then the same thing here, the white and then the gray will just kind of fade away. So that's kind of the idea. Now you can of course use these in conjunction with each other. If you want to use both of these, you can most definitely do that. So here we'll just see gray and it's kind of disappearing from my lights and from my darks as well. There we go. So what was just black, gray, and white, now with just the blend if sliders, we're able to have just gray be visible and have it not be visible in the lighter areas or the darker areas. That's kind of the idea behind blend if, and the applications for this are so numerous it's hard to name because you can use this to adjust your exposure of your image. For instance, if you want to make your brights a little bit darker or your brights brighter, you can do that. You can make your darks lighter or darker. You can do this with color work. You can color your image as a whole, or you can color your highlights, midtones, and shadows separately, which has a bunch of really great applications. So let's go ahead and show you just like a very simple application of blend if with this image. We're just going to add some colors, and then we're going to use those colors to give it a nice color tone. So let's just hit delete on that layer. We don't need it for now. What we're going to do is grab a solid color fill layer. So we'll go to layer, down to new fill layer, and over to solid color. There we are. And we're going to choose like a nice deep purple, something like this. Now you can change this color at any time, so it's not a big deal. You don't have to get it perfect just this first time. Okay, so we've got a solid color fill layer. Of course I can use my layer mask to just paint black. Like if I don't want it to be visible in the center, I can just paint my layer mask. Black will make it invisible, white will make it back visible again. Okay, let's just fill that with white. Let's go ahead and use blend if and make this color just visible in the shadows of our image. So we're going to double click here. We have a choice here. Do we use this layer or the underlying layer? Well, if I use this layer, it's just going to simply disappear at a certain point without integrating with my image. So we're going to use the underlying layer slider. And most of the time you're using blend if, you're going to be using the underlying layer. So let's hold Alt or Option. Now we're going to try it from the left to the right. And it may take you a little bit of time to kind of get like used to how this works. So no big deal. You could just try it and you can see what you're doing, which is just really nice. If it's like, oh, you know what, I meant to do the other side, it's no big deal. And in this case, I want this purple to show up in my darks. So I'm like, oh, you know what, I need to do the other side. So let's hold Alt or Option and we'll just click and drag from the right to the left. There we go. And already you can see that's looking pretty good. Now we have some other options here. Of course, we can decide where these purples are going to come in. So if you want the purple to come in, you know, like in the dark areas, but still in the midtones, you can just leave your slider here. You can go all the way there, and then you can see we have a really nice integration. It looks very natural. And then if you don't want it visible in most of your highlights, like just your darkest shadows, you could do that here. But let's just go right here for now. We'll just go, there we go. We're going to keep this slider, okay, the rightmost at 255, which is just the brightest point. This is for RGB values. And then we're going to take this and bring it all the way to the left to 0. Perfect. So now we have a few different options here because we've got this purple, and literally this is just, it's just purple that's only visible in the shadows now, which is really cool, and it already looks good. But we can kind of extend this a little bit more. We have more options here. For one, for instance, if we'd like to lower our opacity, we can do so. We can have it be more or less visible in our image. There we go, to kind of make that effect a little bit more subtle. And we can also change the blend mode of how this purple actually blends into the photograph. So here in our blend mode, we have a bunch of different examples. For instance, overlay and soft light. These are kind of very common examples. Overlay and soft light will just kind of blend with the image a little bit more. So let's go, I think soft light. Soft light is usually a nice option because it's nice and subtle. So let's hit OK here. There we go. And we're going to turn this layer off and on. And you can see now we've added that nice purple color into our shadows. Okay. Now I'm going to just take this back to normal for now because I really want this color tone to be like pretty color toned. So there we go. We're going to leave it at normal, but I am going to change my opacity. So again, you can double click here to get to your layer style. You can change your blend mode and your opacity here in your layer style, or you can do them right here. So let's just go ahead and drag our opacity slider down to the left a little bit. Somewhere around 50%, I think is looking pretty good. Okay, so that's our shadows. We just toned our shadows with a little bit of purple. It's really fun. Now let's go ahead and take care of our highlights. So I'm going to grab an adjustment layer again. We're just going to go to solid color. Okay, so this time I'm going to go to like a nice yellow, and we're going to go pretty light. There we are. We're going to double click here, and I want this to be visible in my highlights, not my shadows. So let's hold Alt or Option and click and drag from the left to the right. There we go. It's making this layer disappear in the shadows, making it only visible in the highlights. There we are. And we can kind of work on our opacity there. Just make it nice and subtle. Okay. So now you can see this color. Again, it's just a normal blending mode, but it's a little bit less opaque. So we have that yellow coming in, and there we go. I think we're looking pretty good. Now, in this case, let's just turn these off. We can see there's the before and the after. Color toning in general, in my opinion, is usually, I like it to be subtle, so that's why I'm lowering the opacities. You can most definitely crank these up and like do that if you want, but generally I find these effects are a little bit better when they're subtle. So the next thing I want to do is add some colors into my midtones. So let's go ahead and grab another solid color fill layer. There we go. And this time we're going to choose like a nice reddish orange, something like that. We're going to double click here, and this time we're going to use both sliders. So we're going to use the slider for the darks and for the lights. So I don't want this to necessarily show up in the darks. There we go. We're going to pull that there, and I'm going to pull my lights from right to the left also. So basically we've got feathering going on with both of my channels there, and that means it's not showing up really in my highlights or my shadows. It's kind of feather those, and we can go ahead and adjust our opacity to get a little bit of color in our midtones there. There we go. So now we have that red in our midtones. And again, you can do this with regular layers, adjustment layers, all kinds of different things. I'm just using these fill layers because it's a really easy way to show you how to do this. We're going to double click here and change the color. So this is just, again, it's a solid color fill layer. So now that I've filled with this color, you can see I can change this color at any point in time and get some really interesting effects. And this kind of like orange color actually looks pretty good there. Okay, less saturated, more saturated, darker and lighter. There we go. The reason I'm using like yellows and oranges in the light colors, let's just make that a little bit brighter there, is because we do have a person in this image, and people's skin are like generally like an orange color. Even people who have dark skin, it's still orange. It's just like a lot. It's like a very dark orange. So if you do any kind of color toning with people, I recommend having your highlights or wherever your people are visible be kind of like a variation of like red to yellow, somewhere around the orange range. It's just going to look a little bit more natural. You can most definitely do blue. Let's go ahead and show you that as well. We'll just double click here. There we go. You can see we have blue, which doesn't necessarily look bad, but it does make people's skin look a little bit more cool in color, and tends to just make them look a little bit less like natural, I would say. There we go. All right, let's pull that a little bit more towards red and a little bit darker. I think that looks pretty nice there. So you can see these colors can be changed at any time. Just double click here. We can make this a little bit lighter. Again, more saturated, less saturated. There we go. That's looking pretty good. And then that purple color. Let's add just one more color in here. We're going to go to a solid color. This time I want to see if we can pull off a blue in the shadows. So let's double click here. I'm going to hold Alt or Option, and we'll go from the right to the left. There we go. Just get that blue color showing up in there. And then you can use things like an overlay blend mode. Just kind of gets a little bit, there we go. I think that's nice. Some of that blue in there. That kind of reflects what's going on here in our subject's clothing. So we've added some purple, some blue to the shadows, and then we've added yellow to the highlights and this nice red to the midtones. So you can see we can turn these off and on. There we go, and get an idea of how we've actually color toned our image. Let's turn them all off. There we go. Pretty much a straight out of camera image. Looks good. And here's our color tone image. Looks good too. I think we overdid a little bit with this yellow. This is my other suggestion, by the way. I'm just going to hold Shift and click on all these layers and group them together by hitting Control or Command G. My suggestion here is when you do any type of like big color shifts, things like that, just turn those off and on with your image, and that'll help you get an idea of basically, do you like the changes that you made? Anytime I make a big change when it comes to like coloring or retouching, whatever on a photo, I always turn those off and on, and that just gives me a really good idea of like, okay, are these changes actually nice, or am I just kind of like having fun with this image? All right, which that can be fun too, but generally I want to make sure that any changes that I make with color toning, things like that, they actually produce an image that I like. There we go. Let's make that a little less visible also. Okay, perfect. And again, my go-to is making these things subtle, so that's why I'm using lower opacities for all of these. But if you want to go a little bit more opaque, have it be less subtle, that's totally okay too. Perfect. So there we go. There's our before and the after. And again, this is very easy way to color tone. We've just added solid color fill layers that you can change these colors at any time just by double clicking right there, and then using blend if to decide where they're actually going to blend into the image. So that's the whole idea behind the blend if sliders for luminosity blending. Now, in this example, we used it to color our image, but you can also affect your lights and darks to work on your exposure as well. And we've got some great examples of that coming right up. See you in the next video. Bye, everyone.